morning. Good morning. Is this working? Okay.
It is.
Yeah.
You're on.
All right. Go ahead and get settled wherever you like. Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see so many people here. We are Margaret and Tom Horty, longtime members of St. Pius X Parish, and two of the volunteers with Omaha Welcomes the Stranger, which operates a shelter here in Omaha, a temporary shelter for migrants and asylum seekers from the southern border. First, a few housekeeping details. The restrooms are out the door to the back and to the right around the short corner there. Please help yourself to coffee and refreshments on the table. There's been a run on decaf coffee, and so more is brewing. But please feel free to get up and get yourself some at any time. Each table has a half-sheet flyer about an upcoming event on organizing change in a diverse democracy. The event is hosted by Omaha Together One Community and the Institute for Public Leadership. Please take the flyer with you and invite others to join you at the event. Each table also has at least one copy, and we have more, of the letter issued by Pope Francis to the American bishops. This letter was broken into parts and printed with additional commentary in the weekly St. Pius X bulletin. Please take a copy of this letter with you as well. If you are interested in immigration issues, there is a sheet on each table on which you can sign up to stay informed of actions and events on the topic of immigration. And lastly, if you have questions, and you probably will during the course of the morning here, please write those down, and there'll be an opportunity to ask them when we're finished.
Today's gathering is presented by Theology Matters. Theology Matters is a series of conversations that offer valuable resources from Creighton University to the community at large. They are sponsored by the Amelia and Emil Graf Professor of Catholic Theology Chair at Creighton University, and that is our very own Todd Salzman. And are being hosted today at St. Pius X by the Spectrum and Catholic Social Teaching Ministry teams. They explore a wide range of topics from art and archaeology to burning issues of the day through the lens of theology. At the end of the presentation, we will have about 20 minutes for questions. And to keep things moving, as Tom said, we request that you write down your questions as you're hearing people speak. And someone from the team will then read them when we're finished so that everyone can hear. If you need a pen or paper, we have some on the table with the refreshments. Today's topic is close to our hearts, and we are pleased to introduce today's speakers. Dr. Amy Hine is an assistant professor of theological ethics at Creighton University. Her work focuses on migration, responsibility, and Catholic social teaching. Her recent book, Theology in Motion, Migration, History, and Responsibility, explores the historical development of immigration discourse, policy, and trends, and proposes a reparative responsibility ethics framework for guiding Christian approaches to immigration ethics today. Alongside her academic work, she has also been a proud participant in the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, as well as a member of the Cambridge Interfaith Sanctuary Coalition.
Our second and third speakers are people with whom we've worked in the shelter. Father Mike Hoban is a priest with the Missionary Society of St. Columba. Father Mike returned to the United States 9 months ago after spending almost 45 years in Chile, which has its own influx of migrants from other South American countries. He worked in the capital city of Santiago and the Diocese of Iquique, which is located in northern Chile, in the Atacama Desert. There he was very involved with immigrants from Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, and Venezuela. The largest campamento, that means squatter settlement, in Chile was located in his parish. Father Chris Sines is a native of Nebraska. In 2000, he was ordained a priest in the Missionary Society of St. Columban. Father Sines' mission 19 years ago in Chile, participating in diverse ministries such as rural, urban, indigenous, spiritual direction retreats, workshops, and the formation of Columban seminarians. In September of 2017, Father Sines returned to the USA to work out of the regional headquarters of the Columbans here in Nebraska. Currently, he ministers to migrants and refugees, participates in the Spanish-speaking marriage encounter, and helps out in local parishes with sacramental duties, especially those parishes with Hispanic communities. Please join us in welcoming our speakers. And now we'll turn the floor over to Dr. Hine.
Okay, hi everybody. As you heard, my name is Dr. Amy Hine. Feel free to call me Amy. We don't need to be formal here. And my role for today is to give you an overview of Catholic teaching on immigration. And to do that, there we go. This is my book if you would like to buy it. That's what it looks like. To do that, I wanted to start with a document called Strangers No Longer. This is a joint letter from the U.S. and Mexican bishops published in 2003. And they open the letter by stating that they, quote, speak as two Episcopal conferences, but as one church, united in the view that migration between our two nations is necessary and beneficial. At the same time, they say, some aspects of the migrant experience are far from the vision of the kingdom of God. Many persons who seek to migrate are suffering and in some cases tragically dying. Human rights are abused, families are kept apart, and racist and xenophobic attitudes remain. They call this a sign of the times, a reality that the church is called to learn about and learn from, and to which the church must respond. They also insist that the church must judge itself as a community of faith by the way that we treat the most vulnerable among us. This is a consistent idea in Catholic social teaching. Communities, societies, and nations are judged based on their treatment of those who are most vulnerable. This includes migrants, who are often made incredibly vulnerable by global inequalities, the dangers of migration, and the lack of protections that come with citizenship. In response to the signs of the times, the bishops state that Mexico and the United States have a singular opportunity to act as true neighbors to one another. To that end, they spend the first third of the letter summarizing the Catholic perspective on migration, bringing together years of Catholic teaching in order to offer a concise account of what the church has to say. And so that makes this document especially helpful for us today as we think about church teaching on migration. The bishops begin by looking at the foundation of the Catholic and Christian thought, Scripture, the Word of God, and they begin with the Hebrew Bible, or the Christian New Testament, highlighting that throughout the text, God is consistently present and revealed in migration. For example, in Genesis, Abraham follows God's call to migrate to a new land. The formation of God's people begins with migration. A few chapters later, Abraham and his wife Sarah also, in the words of the bishops, quote, extend bounteous hospitality to three strangers who were actually a manifestation of the Lord. And this became a paradigm for the response to strangers of Abraham's descendants. So migration and hospitality are central to the story and the call of the people of God from the beginning. The bishops also cite the story of Joseph, who was sold into slavery, forced to migrate against his will. This story, they say, shows us that God's grace can break through even situations of sin in forced migration. In other words, being forced to migrate against one's will is a situation of sin, what we might call social or structural sin. God's redemptive presence is found in these situations, working for liberation. Joseph is not only liberated from his situation of slavery, but also later on saves his family and all of Egypt from a famine. When social sin is dismantled, all people benefit. The bishops also call attention to another story of liberation, the Exodus story of God liberating the people of Israel from slavery. This becomes a paradigm story through which the people of God understand who God is and who they are called to be in response to God. In particular, throughout the Hebrew Bible, the Israelites are called to treat vulnerable people, and especially foreigners, well. As God says, they must do this because they were once alien travelers in the land of Egypt. This command to welcome and care for the stranger is a frequent occurrence. In fact, the only command repeated with more frequency in the Hebrew Bible is the commandment to worship one God. So this is very, very central. In the New Testament, migration is present at the beginning of the incarnation. Not only does Mary give birth to Jesus when she and Joseph are on the road away from home, but they are then later also forced to migrate, to flee to Egypt to take refuge. The U.S. and Mexican bishops are not the first to note that this story might be relevant for shaping a Christian perspective on migration. In 1952, Pope Pius XII promulgated an apostolic constitution called Exul Familia Nazarethana, in which he addressed this topic. His very first words in that document are, "The emigre Holy Family of Nazareth, fleeing to Egypt, is the archetype of every refugee family." In other words, this story should shape Catholic perspectives on migration. The fact that God incarnate was a refugee matters for how we view migration today. When we encounter and think of refugee families, we should see Jesus in them. The bishops also call attention to Matthew 25 and the parable of the sheep and the goats. In this story, Jesus tells us that we will be judged based on our response to people in need. And in particular, he teaches that those who receive salvation are those who, among other things, welcome strangers. In doing so, he says, we welcome him. We live righteously and love God by extending hospitality to strangers. Jesus, the bishops highlight, also calls his followers to make disciples of all nations. In the New Testament, we see that, quote, "The Spirit of God is at work in the church to unite all people of all races into one family of God." So following Jesus means viewing all people as one human family, and our approach to migration should be shaped by this idea. Next, the bishops turn to, went too far. There we go, Catholic social teaching. Catholic teaching, they assert, has a long and rich tradition in defending the right to migrate. And they set out to summarize these teachings, and in their summary identify 5 central claims that characterize a Catholic approach. First, persons have a right to find opportunity in their homeland. Second, persons have a right to migrate to support themselves and their families. Third, sovereign nations have a right to control their borders. Fourth, refugees and asylum seekers should be afforded protection. And fourth, the human dignity and rights of undocumented migrants should always be respected. I want to spend a little bit of time looking at each of these claims individually. So first, people have a right to find opportunities in their homeland. The bishops write that all persons have a right to find in their own countries the economic, political, and social opportunities to live in dignity and achieve the full life through the use of their God-given gifts. They note that central documents like Exul Familia and Rerum Novarum maintain that families have a right to a dignified life. Rerum Novarum is the first encyclical in Catholic social teaching promulgated by Pope Leo XIII in 1891. And in that document, Leo argues that workers have a right to what he calls a family wage, a wage that's sufficient to support a family. In Leo's context, this is how human dignity is protected. In Exul Familia, Pius cites this idea in order to defend the claim that people have a right to find opportunities at home. These opportunities ensure that their dignity as individuals and as members of families is protected. In other words, people have a right not to migrate. People should not be forced to migrate in order to find a life of dignity. To protect this right, the bishops insist that the root causes of migration, poverty, injustice, religious intolerance, and armed conflicts, must be addressed so that migrants can remain in their homeland and support their families while there. This implies a responsibility on the part of sending nations, the countries that migrants most often come from. These nations have an obligation to ensure their people have sufficient, fair access to the necessities of life, access to a life of dignity. But this also calls the global community to build a world where resources and opportunity are fairly distributed on an international level. When some nations have an excess of resources and others have too few, the result is that people are forced to migrate. This forced migration is a violation of human dignity, and so we all have a responsibility to do something about it. So, all people have a right to conditions worthy of human life. The second claim that Catholic social teaching makes is that if these conditions are not present in their country of origin, all people also have a right to migrate. When a person's home nation is unable or unwilling to provide opportunities and material needs that allow for a dignified life, people have a right to find that life elsewhere. The bishops write, the church recognizes all the goods of the earth belong to all people. When persons cannot find employment in their country of origin to support themselves and their families, they have a right to find work elsewhere in order to survive. Sovereign nations should provide ways to accommodate this right. What the bishops are referring to here is called the universal destination of created goods. This is the idea that the earth's resources are intended for the benefit of all people. In Gaudium et Spes, the Second Vatican Council argues that God intended the earth with everything contained in it for the use of all human beings. Thus, created goods should be in abundance for all in like manner. All people have a right to their fair share of created goods so that they can live a life befitting their dignity. This right is so central that in the words of Pope Paul VI, all other rights, whatever they may be, are to be subordinated to this principle. The right to migrate when you cannot find sufficient opportunity and resources in your homeland is rooted in this more basic right to a fair share of created goods. Borders are subordinate to or less important than this basic human right. The bishops also cite Pope John XXIII, who addressed this right to migrate in his 1963 encyclical Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth. He wrote, quote, every human being has the right to freedom of movement and of residence within the confines of his own country, and, when there are just reasons for it, the right to emigrate to other countries and take up residence there. People have a right to migrate. Alongside this right to migrate, the third claim Catholic social teaching makes is that sovereign nations do have a right to control their borders. This is a consistent teaching of the Church. The bishops write, the Church recognizes the right of sovereign nations to control their territories, but rejects such control when it is exerted merely for the purpose of acquiring additional wealth. In Exul Familia, Pope Pius similarly asserted that the Church recognizes the right of a sovereign state to control its borders in furtherance of the common good. So the common good is really central here. For Catholic social teaching, the right of nation states to control their borders is rooted in and has to be interpreted through a commitment to the common good. The Church defines the common good as the sum total of social conditions which allow all people, either as groups or individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily. In other words, the common good seeks to structure our life together, politically, economically, socially, so that all people have fair or just access to the resources they need to live a dignified life. The Catholic Church teaches that sovereign nation states are or should be a part of this. The purpose of the state is to ensure a just distribution of resources and opportunities and protect human rights. Sovereignty, the right of nation states to self-determine and to be the type of nation they want to be, is meant to protect this ability of states to do this, to enforce laws and protect human rights through the preservation of what's called the rule of law. So the purpose of the rule of law is the promotion of human rights and the promotion of the common good. This means that when human rights are violated, it undermines the rule of law and the purpose of state sovereignty. The rights of states to control their borders is only valid when it is in service of the common good. This does not give states rights to ignore or violate human rights, and it is subordinate to this more basic right of all people to have access to a life of dignity. If people need to migrate in order to do that, sovereign states must allow them to do so. In particular, the bishops note that Catholic teaching holds some nations more responsible than others. They write, quote, more economically powerful nations, which have the ability to protect and feed their residents, have a stronger obligation to accommodate migration flows. So we have some differentiation in responsibility here. Nations that have more wealth and resources have a stronger obligation of hospitality because they have the resources to provide it. To put it the opposite way, more well-off nations have less of a right to control their borders in a world in which so many people lack access to a dignified life and therefore are forced to migrate in search of opportunity. Given the immense inequalities that exist in our world today, the bishops argue that the presumption is that people must migrate in order to support and protect themselves, and that nations who are able to should offer them hospitality whenever possible. So we should presume that people are migrating because they need to, and then presume that we therefore have an obligation to receive those migrants when we have the resources and capacity to do so. It's worth noting that the Catholic Church generally considers the United States a nation with that capacity. For example, in their 1986 pastoral letter, Economic Justice for All, the USCCB insisted that poverty in the United States is a problem of distribution. We do not share our resources justly. We have the capacity to provide not only for all US citizens, but for migrants in need. And because we have this capacity, we have a particular responsibility to receive those migrants. The Catholic Church also offers some principles to guide the enforcement of borders so that it is ethical. When exercising their right to control borders, states should utilize practices and tactics that are targeted, proportional, and humane. Targeted means that immigration policy should be, quote, narrowly tailored, focusing on dangerous and criminal elements. The Church holds that border and immigration policies should aim to keep nations safe from people with dangerous motives, but that these efforts should be targeted, not so overly broad as to curtail basic rights. The goal should be not to infringe on the rights of migrants in general. Proportionality is often a central concern in Catholic ethics. Here, it means that immigration laws and policies should not involve unnecessary force or unnecessarily harsh and punitive enforcement. The USCCB argues that, quote, immigration enforcement officers and Border Patrol agents should receive intensive training on appropriate enforcement tactics and the appropriate use of force. Border enforcement policies should not drive migrants to risk their lives or violate the due process right of migrants. Finally, humane means that all immigration law and policy and enforcement should protect human rights and dignity to the absolute greatest extent possible. Specifically, the bishops argue that, quote, U.S. immigration policy should prioritize family reunification and protect vulnerable populations. Unauthorized immigrants should not be detained for lengthy periods of time or intermingled with violent offenders. U.S. immigration policy should prioritize the use of alternatives to detention for those who do not threaten public safety or national security. And the conditions for processing and holding children upon apprehension should be appropriate and the least restrictive possible. In order to ensure that immigration enforcement is in fact humane, the bishops insist in particular that the dignity and unity of families is a paramount concern. This protection and promotion of families is a central theme in Catholic social teaching, and we see this repeatedly throughout church teaching on migration. In Catholic social teaching and in Catholic theology, the family is considered the building block of society. Strong families lead to strong communities. As humans, we're inherently social, and our relationships should be protected as a matter of our human dignity. This means that immigration policies need to protect not just the human dignity of migrants and individual people, but the human dignity of families and of people in relationships. This concern for the family leads the bishops to two specific policy implications. For example, they write that the good of the family is weakened when children of immigrants are left unprotected. They specify in particular that the United States has birthright citizenship that should be maintained in an effort as an important principle in U.S. immigration law. The Church opposes ending things like birthright citizenship as a violation of human dignity and human relationships. More broadly, the Church is opposed to any policy that results in the separation of family, whether that is at the border or through the deportation of migrants who have legal family members here. The fourth central claim Catholic social teaching makes is that refugees and asylum seekers must always be protected. The bishops write, quote, "Those who flee wars and persecution should be protected by the global community. This requires, at minimum, that migrants have the right to claim refugee status without incarceration and to have their claims fully considered by a competent authority." These words, refugee and asylum seeker, are sometimes used interchangeably because they are by and large aiming to protect people from the same sorts of vulnerabilities, but they are distinct. A refugee is someone who has been forced to flee their country due to a well-founded fear of persecution and is unable or unwilling to return to that country, and so they are applying for refugee status to be resettled somewhere else. So they're applying from a third-party country to end up in another one. An asylum seeker is similarly someone who is fleeing persecution in their homeland, but applies for that asylum, that protection, not from a third-party country, but at a border or from within the country in which they are seeking that protection. The idea here is that sometimes the danger people are under is so acute that it requires them to flee quickly, and they should not have to wait in a long line or a legal process. So they just have to get into the country or to the borders and are then afforded the protections of a refugee while their case is being processed. The final central claim Catholic social teaching makes is that human dignity and human rights of undocumented migrants must always be protected. The bishops write, regardless of their status, migrants, like all persons, possess inherent dignity that should be respected, and government policies that respect basic rights of undocumented people are necessary. All people have dignity and should be treated as such. They advocate in particular for a legalization of undocumented migrants that would allow families to stay together and protect the rights of undocumented workers. This is based in a commitment to respect for family and also to workers' rights. The concern that we have in Catholic social teaching on workers' rights is a disparity in power between employers and their workers. Migrants are much more vulnerable to that disparity in power because of their lack of documentation, so they in particular need to be protected. I'm at time, so I'm going to skip. We were going to talk a little bit about Francis if we had time, but I'm going to skip that. You have his letter. I think his two most important claims here have to do with the proper ordering of love and also with a rejection of dehumanizing rhetoric and the rhetoric of criminality in particular. We'll have time for questions at the end, but for now I will pass it off to Father Mike.
Thank you very much, Amy. That was very complete. Thank you. That very good presentation, and it kind of puts before us like the teaching of the Catholic Church. That all, since Pius XII, every pope has spoken about the importance of immigration and the proper treatment of immigrants. I'm Father Mike Hoban. I'm a missionary priest of the Society of St. Columban. I am son of Irish immigrants who came to the United States. My father was one of 11 children, grew up on a small farm in Galway, and there's no way that farm could support 11 children. So he, like several of his brothers, were forced, they left the country. And now, you know, tomorrow is the feast day of a great immigrant saint. You all know that. And he was, first of all, he was forced to migrate. He was taken as a slave from England, from Britain, and wound up in Ireland. And he returned later on as a priest and bishop, and he converted the Irish people. Huh? So because of the importance of that feast that we're all going to celebrate tomorrow, none of you have to observe fast and abstinence, and you're allowed to drink lots of chili and wine. Okay. Okay. You know, this is the immigration right now is a worldwide problem. Huh? If you read the World Migration Report, there are 281 million immigrants and refugees in the world today. Huh? I'm not going to talk about the whole global thing, but at just point where I've spent most of my life, I'm an immigrant too, so is Father Chris. Yeah, I've been ordained for 54 years, and I've spent 50 years living outside of the United States. So I'm coming back to the United States, and I don't understand this country. Okay. But I'm doing the best I can for that. So I've spent most of my life as an immigrant, and missionaries are immigrants too. And Father Chris and I were both migrants in Chile. Huh? So we're going to talk about South America. Now, principally, you know, one of the great reasons why there's such a crisis in Latin America about immigrants because of failed governments. Above all, a country like Venezuela, where they say about 7.7 million people have fled from Venezuela. Huh? Now it's important now, okay, of those 7.7 million, more than 6.5 million have stayed in Latin America. They've moved on to other Latin American countries to try and save themselves from the political persecution, from the lack of work, from hunger, whatever it is. They've had to move, and they've stayed in South America. Huh? For example, Colombia. Colombia is a country where they have nearly 3 million Venezuelans living there, 2.8 million Venezuelan migrants. Huh? Peru has 1.8 million Venezuelans living there. A country like Ecuador is about 500,000 less, and a place like Panama has received something like 110 million, or 110,000, excuse me, migrants, Venezuelan migrants. So most of them have stayed there. Now they bring, you know, we have the idea that a lot of those migrants left Venezuela. They were professionals, and they brought a lot of professional capacity to a country like Panama, and they also brought it to Chile. Now Chile, as a country, it's a small country of about 19 million people, huh? And it has received 728,000 Venezuelans. Now, how many Venezuelans have come to the United States? Huge country. What's the population of the United States?
340 million.
340 million, something like that? Okay. The United States has received 770,000 migrants, and a much huger Venezuelan migrants. So in a much huger, bigger country, and a country with far more wealth than Chile. Chile had, for a long time, had a very Chile had a very benevolent policy toward migrants for a long time now. You could enter Chile with a tourist visa, and then if you were able to get a work contract, you could apply for your temporary visa within the country and stay there on a temporary visa. Huh? Now that situation had to change because of some unethical practices of some businesses. There was, we had a huge influx of Haitians that came to the country. There was a company called Laws, Latin American Wings. Latin American Wings just had one big plane, the 747, but they were flying it 3 or 4 times a week from the Dominican Republic and Haiti to Chile. What they were doing, they were offering these very cheap tour packages that people from Chile could go and spend time on beach in the Dominican Republic, but then they would go over to Port-au-Prince to pick up a whole plane load of Haitians. And all these Haitians came into Chile with tourist visas, and they were looking for work. They were fleeing, as you know the situation, we all know the situation of a failed government in Haiti. They were looking for some sort of refuge. Now the vast majority of them were peace-abiding, and they just wanted to get an opportunity to escape the hunger and the poverty and the tremendous disorder of the country in which they were born and grew up. So when I was working in the Archdiocese of Santiago, I had contact with the Haitians. Then, with the crisis in Venezuela, the Chilean government also gave a special visa for Venezuelans to come to the country. Later on, they had to rescind it. They just couldn't deal with the influx, and so many of them were entering undocumented. And at present, Chile is a country where 10% of the people are immigrants. They come from different parts. Chile is a country which over its history has received a lot of immigrants from Germany, from Belgium, from England, from after the Second World War, from Italy, etc. It's a country that has always welcomed immigrants. But today in Chile, of the nearly 2 million immigrants, there's 1,913,000 immigrants have entered Chile. That's 10% of the population. 38% of those immigrants are Venezuelans. Okay, now of that 720,000 people who have entered Chile, about half of them have entered undocumented. It's very difficult for Chile, even more difficult for Chile to patrol its borders than for the United States. You can't build a wall in the Andes Mountains. So they crossed through. People could get themselves to Bolivia. Why do they come to Chile? Well, first of all, there's some economic opportunities, especially in the north, where you have a huge mining industry there. So there's some work in subcontractors and a way to make a living. But what people do to get into Chile, they just come through one of the mountain passes in the Andes Mountains, where the Aymara people, the indigenous people, who are on both sides of the border between Bolivia and between Chile, they bring their flocks of llamas across. They've done it for centuries. They bring them over to Chile where they graze, and then they bring them back to Bolivia where they graze. And there was always a huge interchange between Bolivia and Chile. Chileans would go over there because sometimes they could buy things cheaper there and then come back. And they also, even people would go into cross the border into Bolivia and just go to eat something there because food was cheaper and restaurants were more abundant. So this is the situation of what has taken place in Chile. I was privileged to work in northern Chile in a place called Alto Hospicio, which is up in, you all know where the driest desert in the world is, right? It's not the Sahara, it's not the Mojave, it's the Atacama Desert. The Atacama Desert stretches with the northern third of Chile all the way up practically to the border with Ecuador, and it's the driest desert in the world. It's full of minerals, and that means that there are economic opportunities there. So when I went up to northern Chile, there I had a lot of contact with, our parish was a parish packed with immigrants, immigrants from Peru and Bolivia, and most of them were people who had come in, they had all their documents, and they traveled back and forth to Peru, because Peru is only about 6 hours away, and Bolivia is only even less, maybe 3 or 4 hours, but a more difficult journey. So, and I was privileged to work in this municipality outside the port city of Iquique, which is called Alto Hospicio. And Alto Hospicio is the part of Chile which has the most campamentos, or tomas as they're called. They're squatter settlements. It's the desert. So there's lots of free land there, you know. There's no water there, there's no plumbing there. But what the immigrants would do is they would take a piece of the desert, set up some sort of makeshift fence around it, live for a while in tents, then maybe put up some sort of temporary dwelling with wood and cardboard, whatever they could find, and settle there. Okay. So when I was up there in northern Chile, our parish, Sagrado Corazón de Jesus, had a huge immigrant population. And one of the things that was very important, most of these people are Christians. They're Catholics. So if in the Diocese of Iquique, the number of people that started coming to Mass increased significantly because of the arrival of so many immigrants. And of course, the ones with the most difficult situation were and are the Venezuelans. So can I show some photos of it? What should I just?
The mouse.
Just click the mouse?
There's a, let me show you, there's a clicker here.
Okay, what's it? Well, this is the clicker, is it?
Yep, that's it.
Thank you, Colin. Okay. So I'm going to show you some pictures
Might
of
need to
it.
be turned on.
You can either click your mouse or
Okay. Now, okay, there's a little girl and her name is Samantha. And Samantha is Chilean, because she was born in Chile. See, the United States is not the only country in the world where you obtain citizenship when you're born in the country. So Samantha, her parents are Colombians. They're from a part of Colombia where there's a lot of Afro-Colombians. But Samantha is a Chilean, because she was born there and she's being raised there. Okay. So the way we take on our parish, one of the things that took part was we try to do as much as we could for children, especially the children, because they're living in the desert. The local municipality brings the water, but there's no sewage. But there's lots of desert. So the desert is ultimately where you have to take care of some of your special needs. You've got to go off there. Okay. So one of the things we've tried to do is work very much with the children, because oftentimes they go hungry. So in the Sacred Parish of Sagrado Corazón de Jesús, there's a soup kitchen, there's a distribution of food packages, there's a blanket campaign, which I'll show you in a moment, and also the children who are lucky enough to get into school, because with such a huge influx of children, the schools were not able to handle it. But they're trying to do the best they can. And one of the things, again, which shows the way the Chilean government tried to treat the immigrants with respecting their human dignity. So a lot of women came in and they were pregnant. Younger women came in pregnant. I asked some of the women, how were they treated in the hospital when they gave birth to their children? I said, very well. And then the Chilean government, even though the children, for the first year of the life of that child, the Chilean government will do its best to look after that child. Okay, so baby, this is a group of, we not only do some work with, trying to meet their human needs, but we also have taken on, and they have increased the catechetical program. So I'm just going to show you a few signs that when Christmas time came, well, first of all, I wound up being a catechist at 78 years of age. I'm now 81, 78, and I was one of the most disorganized catechists that ever was. What happened was the lady, during the pandemic, Senora Leda, she was a good catechist, and she was a catechist in one of the squatter settlements, but she got sick, and she just couldn't. Thank God it wasn't with COVID, but her husband said you can't go back in there and teach anymore. So we looked for a new catechist, but it was time of the pandemic. No one wanted to take it on. So who had to become the catechist? Padre Miguel, okay. So, but I learned now, first few classes with the children, it was just absolute chaos. Because I'm not very good at discipline, neither discipline of myself nor of anyone else, okay. So, anyway, the kids paid no attention to me. They were poking one another, they were running off to the bathroom, then they were up on the swings. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I discovered two things helped. First of all, if I gave them something to eat, they sat down, okay? And second, the other thing I learned that, they love to draw. They love to draw and they love to color. And so each week I based the class on, we'll bring a drawing that, a photocopy which they had to draw, and they had to paint in some ways. And they really concentrated on that, and they wanted it to be done very well. And while they were drawing, and while they were coloring, I could speak about the gospel. They learned their prayers, they learned their hymns. And when Christmas time came, I said to them, well, why don't you build your own Christmas crib? So you'll see this is some of the figures that they built. They used, all the inside of old toilet rolls, and they got some of the women got some fabric for them, and they eventually put together a Christmas crib set. So we just show there's some of the figures that they put together themselves. So, and that Christmas crib was put beside the very nice Christmas crib that in the main church at Sagrada Corazon. Now there you're going to see, like, one of my great catechetical achievements was to feed them, because they seem to always be hungry. Okay, so we'll give you that. Okay, there they are again, sitting down there, and you can see most of the children that came for the catechetical class were either Colombians, some Venezuelans, but the biggest majority were Colombians. Huh? But you also had Bolivians and occasionally someone from Peru. Not many Chileans, only maybe 2 or 3 Chileans, and all the kids that came to catechetical class. Here's, in the parish there are a lot of Peruvians, and the Peruvians have a huge devotion, which is one of the biggest devotions, I think maybe only second to Our Lady of Guadalupe, is the feast in Lima of El Señor de los Milagros. Huh? And this is a whole month that goes on. So we have a big, in the parish we have a big Peruvian contingent. And these are them dressed, they dressed in purple for the whole month. And the whole month is dedicated to honoring our Lord, El Señor de los Milagros. Huh? These are 2 Peruvian immigrants that, where they came, the Peruvians are very faithful in coming to Mass. Huh? So they're celebrating that month of El Señor de los Milagros. Okay. This is a photo of the Atacama Desert. And the Atacama Desert, as I told you, is the driest desert in the world. But in the valleys, there's some valleys where the people, the Aymara people, who most of them have moved to Iquique or to Arica, but they still maintain their homes up in the villages in these little valleys where there's some sort of water that trickles down from, and they do some subsistence farming in those valleys. So this just shows that they put up a cross there. And one of the most important apostolates in the Diocese of Iquique is going up to help them when they celebrate their feast. Now, in this, one of the biggest campamentos, squatter settlement, where there's a huge influx of Venezuelans, you can see at the bottom there, you can see the houses there. We're lucky that we teamed up with the Daughters of Charity. And that with the Daughters of Charity and the Columban Fathers, we did the same as the people. We took a piece of land. We don't own it. We just took it. Okay. And thank God so far nobody's come after us. Okay. But one of the reasons why, together with the Daughters of Charity, we realized that the people had no place to meet. So we were put together and we built the Holy Family Sagrada Familia Community Catholic Community Center, where they have Mass every Saturday in the evening. It's where a huge number of children would come. So this is the building of the temporary structure. As I pointed out, it was built through donations from the Columban Fathers and the Daughters of Charity. This is when it was completed and we had the inauguration, the blessing of the community center. And our bishop, this is our bishop, Isauro Covilli. He's the grandson of Italian immigrants to Chile. And he's got a great story too of all the Chilean government in the south of Chile gave him and a lot of Italian immigrants. They gave him land that belonged to the Mapuches. And Father Chris can tell you more about the Mapuches, because he worked among them. But this land was taken from the Mapuche people. What happened here in the States, you know, the land, who owned the land here in Nebraska first? We won't get into that, okay. But they gave the land to Italian immigrants, and he can tell you how much they suffered just to begin farming that, because all they were given was the land. So Isauro Covilli, he's a Franciscan, very good bishop, and this is the day he came to bless the Holy Family Community Center. And you see him holding hand with one of the children. Here's myself celebrating Mass in the open air before we had the community center. Again, you'll see in to my right hand there, you'll see one of the sisters who was helping out at Mass. And the smartest person there, getting into the shade, was the dog lying under the... But you're also going to show you that with the sisters, we'll show you some of the other things. This is when we celebrated Good Friday, and we went through the squatter settlement with the people. So early on Good Friday morning, we went through the campamento with the Stations of the Cross. And again, we had a lot of mothers. The fathers were often looking for day work or doing something else, but there were some men who came too. But it was mostly mothers and children when we had the Via Crucis, we had the Stations of the Cross. Here I am with the children reading one of the Stations of the Cross, and you can see the desert. One of the beautiful things about there is that it never rains there. So the people you can see some of their, in the background, some of their homes that they're trying to build little by little. But they don't have to worry about a roof because it never rains. So you don't have to, and there's no tornadoes up there if you want to move there, okay. So there's myself. Okay, there I am celebrating Mass. Now another thing which we did with the Daughters of Charity was to help the people install water tanks, because the municipality would come with trucks and bring water to the people, but the spigot to open it was huge, and the people were coming along with these little tanks, plastic tanks to get water with a small spigot, so a lot of water is being used. So the 14 different water tanks were put up in this particular campamento, where the truck could come along, and with its spigot, the hose, it could put plenty of water and fill it up, and then the people could come along and get water. Here, it's the desert. And one of the things people think, the desert, it's very hot. No, the desert's not always hot. At night, the temperature drops. And in the winter, it can be quite cold. Not as cold as Nebraska, which I've learned in the last few months. All right. But we had, with the Daughters of Charity, again, with thanks to Columban benefactors and also to the Daughters of Charity, most of the blankets were bought by Columban, and we were able to distribute blankets to the families. You see all the mothers there taking them, and see, Chile needs immigrants because it has a very low birth rate. Nebraska seems a little bit better at the birth rate than maybe New York, okay. But that's a big problem. That's a problem in Europe too, that the birth rate has gone down, and as the population gets older, who's going to help pay their Social Security? Who's going to take care of them? Huh? So Chile, as birth rate has gone down, it's about 1.7 per married couple or per family, which is not enough to replace the people. So Chile needs the immigrants. And most of the immigrants that have come to us, you'll see, they all have 2, 3, 4 children. Again, we have the mothers there. All right, so let's just give you an idea of what's going on in Chile. And the reception of immigrants is a blessing. It is a blessing. And they should be always felt welcome. The United States, I come from an immigrant family, and I've been most of my life, like Father Chris, I've been an immigrant. And I was treated very well in Chile. And I hope all immigrants will be treated fairly and justly in this country.
Sorry, I have to sit down. There's a strange sense of humor God has, or maybe it's injustice. I live in a community where myself and Father Mike, with Father Tom Cusack, who's 92 years old, doesn't have a drop of arthritis in his body. Here I am, 57 years old with advanced arthritis in both knees. And I said, well, God has some strange sense of humor in that. But anyway, but it's all right. You get along. It humbles me in many ways, Okay, probably I'm just going to be saying maybe a lot of similar things what Dr. Amy and Father Mike Hoban has said, but maybe in a different way. I'm approaching it from the viewpoint of just on the ground, looking at it from life experience and these things we've talked about, especially in regards to the migrant reality in the world. And I just want to start off with this reflection of like, what is really kind of movement behind at least those who kind of are against migrants or refugees, or what fuels some of this for people, even good Catholics, good faithful Catholics, to not stand with Pope Francis or the bishops. I mean, we have that, and I've heard that. You know, I'm a born and raised Catholic in Nebraska here. I grew up with a particular political and religious vein in my life, which has been shaped over now by my scripture studies as a seminarian and priest, and then my many years of living outside of the United States in a different reality that is not my own, as Father Mike says, as an immigrant, as a missionary immigrant. And it is a very way different looking at the world, how you see the world, how the world sees us, compared to how we think the world sees us. But I want to start off with my reflection of something that happened to me probably within my first 2 years of the seminary back in the early 90s, where I was invited with our class to go to Pine Ridge Reservation, South Dakota, by the Lakota Sioux. And we were to have an experience there, what was under the class of cross-cultural reference, cross-cultural experience. That's one of your photos I have. This. So I had experienced that. Now, as a child growing up, I loved Western movies, especially John Wayne movies. I loved watching them and experiencing that. And then I went to Pine Ridge, and I heard the stories. It was the first time I ever came in contact and talked with Native Americans at any point. And it was, you heard Native Americans who were Christian, remained Christian, those who stopped being Christian, and those who never were Christian. But the painful story that comes between what happened to the Native Americans here in the introduction of Christianity. And I left that changed. And one of the ways that changed, even to this day, I cannot watch a John Wayne movie. Searchers was one of my favorite movies. I can't watch it now, even to this day. We're talking like 30 years ago. And I went back, and I was in this reflection group near our seminary with the local people. There's a lot of University of Chicago. I studied in Chicago, so in Hyde Park, so the University of Chicago was nearby. So I was attending the local church, and therefore I was in this reflection group. And this young woman heard about my experience in Pine Ridge. She was a University of Chicago student, and she said, "What was that like?" And I told her. She said, "What did that do for you?" And I told her about how this thing happened to me. And she looked at me, she said, that is why I would never do an experience like that. And I kind of like, what do you mean by that? She said, well, I figure if I do that type of experience, it is going to demand such a conversion and change me that I'm afraid I won't be able to make it or do it. So I'd rather be ignorant than know. I was flabbergasted. But this was not a bad person. This was a person who, was practicing her faith in the way she best knew how. But there was a fear. There was a fear of getting to know the other because it might change her. And I do think a lot of people who are probably have a very different view of immigration than I would of Father Mike or Dr. Amy, it's because a lot of it can be based out of fear and not really knowing. So it remains a political issue, a political ideology, instead of a human issue. And sometimes maybe an easier space to kind of stay in that, instead of saying, I'm going to walk out of that for a bit and see what's on the other side. And it was interesting, there was a Colombian who worked there, who worked many years in the Philippines, an Irish Colombian, and then he came here, worked here many years, and he left about 2 years ago, Father John Brannigan, and his comment to me when he left is, you Americans are strange. But usually where religious faith is what critiques political ideology, but now it's political ideology critiquing religious faith. He said, I find that very strange what's happened here now. And it's like, oh, I said, I never looked at it that way. So what is kind of like maybe my reflection of this issue over the years, the two legs that kind of fuels this? Well, I think the one leg is, I'm not trying to make a political statement on it, but America first type of attitude thinking. That I really living outside the world, outside the United States for a number of years in a different context, I do really think that we do think we are the center of the world, whether consciously or subconsciously, that we are the center of the world. It could be an influence of manifest destiny, you know, that Columbus that divinely found the United States, that we are like the center of the world. And this never hit more home to me with the experience of September 11th, 2001, where I was in southern Chile working. And what had happened in that time, I found out hours later what happened here in the United States. And yes, it was on the news in Chile for the first day, and then in the second day. Third day, guess what? Chile went back to normal life. What did you get? Maybe Chilean news is 1 hour each night. You probably got a 1-minute blurb about something about September 11th or something related to it. That was it. Chile was talking about sports. Chile was talking about its own politics. It was talking about its own things, and maybe something with Argentina or something like that. It went back, and when I was calling my family and friends back home at that time, it was, as you would know, because I wasn't living it here, that there was a constant barrage, everything all day, boom, 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 boom. Obviously, it was something that greatly affected us, but Chile went back to normal life. And on top of this, I had this because as Father Mike knows, I always say we do not own September 11th. 1973, said what happened? Anyone know? September 11th night. Of course, Father Mike knows. Gino Pinochet bombed the presidential palace and took over. The dictatorship began. Supported by who? The CIA, the US government at that time. And don't think that Chileans picked up on the irony of September 11th, 1973 and 2001. I don't think they picked up on that irony on that. And so anyway, so I think there's a sense that somehow we are freer than any other country. There's no country like us. And that we're number one. And I had heard this by a Hispanic couple who attended Mass somewhere in Archdiocese, I'm not going to say. And they heard from the pulpit a priest say this statement. I'm taking the word from the Hispanic couple that told me. And as well, I had a similar statement made, the same statement made by a woman who wrote into our Colombian organization because she was complaining about our magazine was supporting illegal immigration for our work, what we're doing on the border. And what they both stated was, immigrants coming here should obey the laws of the United States because the laws of the United States are the laws of God. And I think there's, whether consciously or unconsciously, I think it filters down to a lot of people, whether they mean to say it or not, that there is this type of thing that there's nothing like this. And I heard people on the Father Mike has mentioned it too, like here they say like no other country in the world allows this type of what's happened with our migration. But we just heard Chile has the same thing going on. I can tell you Korea, our guys in Korea, they're working with a lot of migrants, whether from China, North Korea and all, very similar thing. We have guys in Myanmar, they talk about the Rohingya, I believe it's the Muslims, who are across, now there's huge refugee camps in Bangladesh, the neighboring border. Very similar thing. We're not the only ones facing such issues. Birthright is not an only U.S. issue. Actually, most of Latin American countries have birthright. But somehow we kind of get into the warped sense that we're the only ones. We're the only ones. And at this point, I just closed it. I remember even sometime in the 80s, there was a U.S. reporter who was interviewing the last visionary of Fatima, Sister Jacinta, I think was she was still alive, she was fairly old. It was asking about different things about the vision, Our Lady of Fatima. At one point, the U.S. reporter asked her, and did Our Lady have a special message for the United States? And Jacinta just kind of looked back like, what? No, it's a message for the world. But sometimes I think this kind of filters into the thinking that goes behind this. And the other thing is I think the other leg would be the American dream, the PR campaign of the United States. I never realized this myself until I did part of my seminary studies of 1 year in the Philippines. So my classmates were Filipinos, Fijians, and Tongans. And one evening, we were sitting there watching a movie from the United States. Just a normal movie, I don't even remember what it was. And the scene that was presented was a mother, father, son, and daughter sitting down having a normal meal. And at one point, one of the Filipinos turned to me and said, "Wow, you guys eat like that every day?" I said, "What do you mean?" "Like that." And I finally looked and I say, it always takes an outsider to see things sometimes that we don't. And I looked where I saw what this family of four was eating. What they had on the table would have fed 10 or 15 people. And I thought to myself, it was my parents and I had four other siblings, so there was five of us. We wouldn't even have half that much on the table when we sat down for eat on a normal meal. And it was just like, wow, I didn't even realize. It really made me reflect on that, how we spend billions and billions of dollars each year, whether consciously or unconsciously, explicitly or implicitly, through movies, through commercials, campaigns, or whatever, or even through our businesses, that here is the American dream. You come here, you can achieve anything, and you can have this life. And then all of a sudden we're very confused. Why do people want to come here? We send a mixed message. Why do people want to come here? And I remember eating out with one of my Filipino companions in the seminary now in the United States, and he came over. We had gone out to eat, and we're this is a simple restaurant, and the waitress came up and said, "Oh, you're not from here?" She said, "No, I'm from the Philippines." "How long have you been here?" "This is about a month or two." I said, "Oh yeah, he's studying here." She's like, "Well, welcome, and know this, that you are free here, and you're now in the United States, and you can do anything you want. You're free here." And she walked off, and he just kind of looked at me and said, "Well, but I was also free in the Philippines too." But I think these are the type of things that kind of influences a lot, the thinking that we don't realize. And it took me living like 25 years outside the country to really realize that, and I can see how some people are, they're not meshing with what the bishops are saying or what Francis are saying, who are, like Francis is not saying anything new, he's saying what's been said for decades or centuries, what St. John Paul II has said, what St. Benedict has said. There's no difference. But today, it's a different atmosphere regarding these issues today. And now that I worked with immigrants to some degree when I was in Chile. When I was there, I left before Father Mike. My time, Colombians were coming in quite steadily in my time. And when I was leaving, the Haitians were coming in quite regularly. And then I came back from the United States, and I've been working, as within here. There is the biggest portion here is Mexican. Salvadoranians are next, and then the Guatemaltecos are there. And I often ask them, why are you coming? I work a lot, whether they're documented or not, but why are you coming? Just out of curiosity, why? First of all, this is the first place you come to is Nebraska. A lot of them would have gone to California or Texas, and it wasn't really what they're destined to. So why Nebraska? I'm just curious why. And they all basically said the same thing. They said, number one, we could find jobs here. Most of them work in constructions, the meatpacking houses, and restaurants, where U.S. citizens don't care to. A lot of roofing, whatever. And they're busy, because no one else is hiring. But migrants, we could find jobs. They said we could find jobs. They said number two, it's more economically affordable compared to California, Texas, and all. And then number three, they said it's a safer place to raise a family. That's why we come here. We just want a second opportunity. And as I look at that, I said, that's true, they really are. But now, and if they're, but also looking at why, also other reasons they come. For a while, we had a program called the Immigration Detainee Accompaniment Program, visiting the immigrants detained at Douglas County Jail. This is before the pandemic. And most of the immigrants who were there that I visited, they were not criminals, hardcore criminals, I should say. Most of them who were there obviously were stopped because they were illegal, but they were usually pulled over because they did either a traffic violation or drunk driving, and they're driving under influence, and they had some beers and they got pulled over. That's what most of them, and then one man, I was remembering Carlos from Guatemala, I asked him, why are you here? He was a young man, probably about 20 years old, 21. He said to me in Guatemala, as you know, there's a terrible thing with gangs. And the gangs, when he became adolescent, were trying to recruit him. And eventually they told him, if you don't join us, we'll not only kill you, we'll kill your grandmother and all your family. And he told his grandmother, she says, leave the country. Leave the country. Just leave. I don't want to see you be killed and all that. So he did. Because he felt like that was the only option he had. I couldn't imagine that if I was told that here. You know, somebody was going, if I don't follow your group, your gang, I would be killed. And then not only had to kill my parents, my brother and sister, and everyone else. Well, options, sometimes we don't look at what options I have. And now, as well as working with the Marriage Encounter, and I do go travel around the country giving retreats. And recently I was in Chicago, and we had 11 couples signed up to join the retreat. Only 4 showed up. And later I found out why a good number of them decided not to come, because they were afraid that they may get stopped and arrested, or that ICE might invade the retreat house. And they even had some who even told me they're not going to Mass anymore because they're so afraid that that ICE will go to the church. So it's like, one's faith life now is so affected, and they can't practice their faith. It's almost like there's no religious freedom to practice their faith. And one final thing I will say before this, I know Ruben Garcia at the Annunciation House down in El Paso, who's quite well known, I'm sure, anyone who knows his work for many decades working. And I was there talking to him, and I was talking about the migrants that were processed through. Now, any migrant that's processed through the border, they have background check. But not only background check through the United States, like the FBI, but also CIA, Interpol. I mean, he named all the stuff that all these migrants that came up, like now at our Valle, all the stuff they had gone through. They had to clear all of that. And if they had something, they weren't obviously processed. They were taken back to Mexico. But all that they had gone through, all of that. And he said to me, imagine if one Sunday we told all the people who came to Mass here on a Sunday that you're going to have the same background checks as the migrants do on the border. What do you think we'll find? Will people be happy? Will be people willing to know? And he says, we'll probably find there's more danger within our own community than with the migrants coming. So anyway, I just wanted to give that type of background. It's kind of like the on-the-ground reality, but I don't think I said anything different than what the previous 2 people said. So thank you very much.
So first of all, is this on? Hello, there we are. First of all, I want to say thank you to our 3 speakers. So let's just give them all a round of applause. In an effort to make sure that everyone can hear the questions, we're asking you to please write them down. So I have my question right here. There are papers on your tables that have little question marks, that's what those are for. So if you can write your questions down, I'll come around and grab those and read them out loud so that everyone can hear. While you're doing that, I want to remind you all to make sure you sign in on our sign-in sheet, and at the bottom of there are 3 little questions at the bottom. If you're interested in getting involved, we have some upcoming events. The first one, though, that's not on here is our OTOC fundraiser, which is on Sunday, March 30th. If you're interested in tickets, I can sell you a ticket, or I can give you the QR code so you can go online and buy a ticket. So me or Rosie Volkmer, Rosie's over here in the tan sweater, we can make sure you get tickets to that event. The second one is a training that we're having here at Pius. And you've got a little half sheet of paper on your tables about a training session that we're doing here in this room on April 9th. It's kind of an OTOC 101. So for those of you who have been involved with Omaha Together One Community, but it's been a while, this would be a great refresher for you. If you've not been involved in community organizing and you want to find a way to get involved on a more local level, this would be a way for you to learn about what we're doing in OTOC. So if you're interested in any of these things, there's the April 9th session here. If you want to be invited to the OTOC Immigration Committee meetings, those are on, the next one is Monday, April 7th at Augustana Lutheran Church. Put a number 1 by your name on this sheet if you're interested in the first one, and number 2 if you want to know more about the immigration team. And if you're interested in these kinds of sessions with Theology Matters, if you'd like to help plan those, put a number 3 by your name, and we'll collect these at the end. So I have a question for our speakers. Do we want to have the speakers come to the front, or just can they sit where they are and I can hand them the microphone? Let's do that. So I have a question for any of you to answer, and then while they're answering my question, then I'll come around and grab your questions. So our current administration is dehumanizing immigrants and referring to them as vermin. What do you think is the most effective way for us to engage in our federal representatives and our bishops to let them know that we're not okay with that? And number 2, there's kind of a second part. What's the best way to get involved locally? Do you have what means do you think we have? I know OTOC is one way. Are there other ways for people to get involved on a local level to feel like we have a voice and a place? And I'm going to come around and grab.
Well, what I was emphasizing before, and I think the other 2 agree, is when you get to know people as people, not as an issue, but we get to know as people. And somehow maybe even arrange, like with our federal representatives or lawmakers or whoever and the bishop, to meet immigrants, whether at shelters and all, to get to know them as people and not as an issue. And that'd be very different, I think.
I think also making sure that we know and that other people in our lives and our representatives and our church leaders and all of that know the history of how this dehumanizing rhetoric has been utilized in this country before, the language of criminal or invasion or savage, how all of that has been used to pave the way for dehumanization and a violation of human rights, so that people know the effect of this and why we need to be against it. I'm very new to Omaha, so I don't have a good sense of local places to plug in.
Well, we're involved with Omaha Welcome to Stranger. That's one. Group OTOC has some various, and there's Refugee Women Rising. A lot of those groups know each other, so if you plug into one, they can let you know about the other. And they might have different emphasis or something, but you could find out. The Latino Center as well.
Well, first of all, right now there's a national novena going on, and if you look at it across the country, the Catholic bishops have come out in opposition to what's taking place. some of them more strongly than others, but most of them are practically here in Nebraska. The Catholic Bishop has come out and said that they will stand with the immigrants. So, like, I think we just have to tell, you know, in a very respectful way, tell other Catholics that this is, you know, that what our Catholic stance is on migration. And just remind people of our own history. You know, we're all somewhere along the line, some more recently than others, we're all the descendants of immigrants, you know. And then, of course, I think that, like, what Amy is doing is very important. Like, the hidden treasure in our Catholic faith, and not only here in the United States, but in Chile as well, is Catholic social teaching, which has been developed, you know, for well over 100 years, 150 years, you know. It's a treasure. It's just the Somatic experience, and when we ultimately it brings about, you know, when we understand what Catholic social teaching, we can find ways. You know, you can do this. What's taking place. You can protect the border without offending people's dignity. You can do it in other ways. You can offer to what is wrong with the United States that these dreamers, these are children that grew up there. They're Americans, huh? And we're going to threaten them with deportation. That's terrible, huh? Now, right now, there is going on in nationally. There is a novena, and it's with the Chicago Theological Union. Yesterday, for example, the Archbishop Nelson Perez of Philadelphia was on there. It's very short. It's only about 10 minutes. A prayer. It's a prayer session every day. You can get on it in Zoom. It's the National Novena for Immigration. Then there's another organization called Clinic, which is the Catholic Legal Immigration. I think it's Coalition. So Clinic, you can get it. There's a huge amount of information. We can share that. And the other thing is, like this parish and Tom and Margaret, you know, it was wonderful to be at Mass today because this diverse community, and they feel so welcome here. They feel so welcome. They come to St. Pius X. And that, so far, I've seen that in the parishes that I visit, that they're welcome. And we'll do everything we can. Maybe it's just helping I met a man today from Sudan. He was well, look what's taking place there in that country. There's at least, if not 10 million people have had to flee the fighting. It's gone on for years. And here's a man, he's come from Sudan, he's bringing up his children as Americans, U.S. citizens. We need to know their stories. But keep up, you know, there's a very welcoming atmosphere. And that kind of prayer that you say at the end of that, I wish every Catholic parish had that, see. But it's very good, so we can do a lot. We can do a lot. But we can't be passive, that's all.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more questions. One is sort of a housekeeping kind of thing. Someone wants to know if we can get a copy of Dr. Amy's PowerPoint.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So we'll get that here, and then if you're interested in that,
Contact me at the parish and I can send it.
Okay, so get a hold of Colleen Sasula here at the parish, and she will get that out to you. Or write it on your sign-in sheet too, if you want a copy of the PowerPoint, and then we'll make sure you get it. Also, just so you know, this whole session has been recorded, or is currently being recorded, and we will have that on our website shortly. It usually takes a couple days, but it'll be listed on our website here. Next question, what would you say to someone who says he or she supports legal immigrants but not illegal immigrants?
Yeah, I would say that you have to look at the reason people end up here without documentation and the ways that the United States has encouraged historically undocumented immigration, both explicitly at times and other times implicitly. We have this sort of need within our economic system for these laborers who can be paid low wages and exploited, and so we encourage this migration, but then we don't want to afford legal pathways or legal rights to those people. I would also point people towards the immense backlogs and the fact that there just isn't a legal option for so many people, and when you have these basic human needs, those basic rights usurp the rights of states to have control over their borders. And so the human need that is driving undocumented migration is more important and more fundamental in Catholic teaching and certainly in other ethical systems as well.
We have a man working on the border, Father Bill Morton. He's been there 27 years. He's on the Juarez side from El Paso. And he will say through his 27 years, he's even seen American, U.S. businesses come over and actively recruit, pick up, and this is not legal, and just bring over the border to work. And they've done this. And whenever the economy is good, no problem. When the economy is bad, they're a problem. They're illegals. But this was pushed on by U.S. businesses because they wanted the cheaper labor. That's what he said.
We experienced that firsthand. When we first moved to Madison, my husband was appointed to be the pastor of the Methodist Church there, and there had been there's a pork plant there, and it had changed hands. And when it changed hands, the new company that owned the pork plant would take buses to Mexico and bring folks up to work because they would work for so much less. And it tore that community apart. And we got there right after it happened. It was great. So I witnessed that firsthand of what that did to the community. And it's changed over time. That was 30 plus years ago, but it's still, it really was heartbreaking for both sides because these were just people who wanted to work, and that you had this community who lost their jobs, good paying jobs, and were given to people who would work for so much less. So it's a complicated issue. The next question here is the U.S. falls. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just one thing, like in Omaha, I was a stranger. You know, for me, it's great to be able to talk to the people and listen to their stories. And one of the people, the man that I met there, he was a police officer in Venezuela in Caracas. One day he caught a man with drugs and a gun. He arrested him and brought him down to the station to be booked at the police station in Caracas. When he got there, the officer in charge, the commanding officer in the police station, told him to give the drugs back and the gun back to the man. Okay. Now, after that, he started receiving threatening phone calls, himself and his family. His apartment was broken into, and he had a motorcycle, and that was destroyed. So he had no choice. He had to leave. It's just like that story that Father Chris shared about, you know, the young man was told by the grandmother told him, get out of here. Okay. They have no choices in a lot of ways. Another story of another woman there, and she and her husband at the shelter. She was an election official in Venezuela. She saw what was going on. And she knew if anything was wrong, it wasn't going to be the higher-ups who were going to be in trouble. She had to get out of there. Her husband was, with her husband's family, they owned a small industry, was taken away from them, expropriated, and they had no means of surviving. So they came here to earn money to send back to their families, and in order, especially for her mother, who doesn't have good health. So the pressure that was there, they didn't have time, as Amy pointed out, to go through long bureaucracy, wait 7 or 8 months in Mexico to try and come up here.
Okay, our next question is, the U.S. falls so short of what the church teaches in economic and migrant justice. So how do we keep doing this work? Kind of a loaded question. It's a big question.
I tend to be pretty pessimistic about our ability to have top-down change in this country. I think that the only way that we can really do it is grassroots and on the ground and person to person, and building better relationships with the migrants who are in our communities and building networks of people who are doing that. And then that sort of work, I find, is contagious. It spreads, and then maybe we build from the bottom up. I think that how we sustain hope is being able to make small impacts where we are that hopefully build towards a more just world overall.
Well, I think it's kind of, like I said at the very beginning, how do you jump over their comfort zone? You get out of what they want to hold on to and what they know to the unknown. And it would have to be, like as Amy said, person to person, small events, much like these, but to kind of try to approach people maybe who are at least on the borders of this issue. Because I think the people who are very firmly, they're not going to. I find it very hard to do. It's a hard thing. I grew up with a lot of people, very staunch Catholics, but I've even heard them say, I'm for any bishop that's against Francis, for instance. Now, I heard very staunch Catholics, and they never would have said that before. But now it's to the point like, it's, once again, I think it's the driving force is political ideology now is the most important thing. It's drummed up for that for years.
The next question, how do you understand Ordo Amoris? We need to love everyone, but we don't love everyone equally. So number 1, our family. Number 2, our neighbors. Number 3, our community. Number 4, our country. And 5th, the world. This has been turned upside down. We hate our fellow Americans and love the world.
So Francis very helpfully addresses this in his recent letter, which you all have a copy of. I have sort of two thoughts about this. One basic one is that the gospel is more important than Thomas Aquinas. And so if something we're reading in Thomas Aquinas seems to go against this sort of impulses central to the gospel, we should side with the gospel. But more specifically, Francis talks about reading the Order of Loves through the lens of the Good Samaritan and this, what we call in Catholic social teaching, the preferential option for the poor, and this call that we have to be particularly concerned for people who are vulnerable and poor, and that might even sometimes outweigh this sense that we are to care for the people closest to us most, and then whatever is left over we give to other people. What I think is really impactful about the Good Samaritan story in this question is that the legal scholar that Jesus is talking to when he tells this story is asking, who is my neighbor, with the sort of implicit desire to limit who he has responsibility to, right? And Jesus responds by flipping that and saying, go be neighborly to people. So when we are trying to limit who we have a responsibility to care for, Jesus is calling us to expand our circle of concern at all times. And I think that in a situation, in a world in which there are so many people with acute, desperate needs for basic human rights, that contextualizes this sort of basic sense that we in general have responsibility for the people closest to us, because responsibility also responds to need and to the needs of the people who are most vulnerable.
And I think it's important to say that in Jesus' time, there was different views of the Messiah who would come. And one of the strongest and most popular view of his time was the Davidic Messiah, which was restoring of the power of Israel over the other nations, and to be the first amongst nations, to be Israel first type of slogan. And he rejected that for the suffering servant theological vein of the Messiah, which was more universal, And if you look at how he treats the foreigners who were considered outsiders and just, you don't deal with them, the Roman centurion, the Syrophoenician pagan woman, and amongst others, and Samaritans, his approach was very different than what his contemporaries would have had. I would say that would be it for me.
Okay, I got one other question, and if whoever asks this, if I don't ask this correctly, let me know. It's for Father Sands. Can we think of commitment to supporting undocumented immigrants a freedom of religion issue?
I would say yes. I mean, if they are feeling like they cannot practice their faith, and we talk about religious freedom. And and by the way, this is the context of this, that as we talk about, sometimes we think we're more advanced than others. Native Americans didn't have religious freedom in this country until 1974 or 75. They were not allowed to practice their religion before that. And think about that, if we go around, we're number one in democracy. All right, but the thing is, yeah, I would say it's very much religious, if their faith is being impeded, and this is one of the things in the Constitution, the freedom of religion.
And did I miss any questions, first of all?
Just,
We'll let Father.
just very briefly, when we come to Mass, there are no strangers. And we have to guard that, always. So we have to, if someone comes from ICE, you know, hopefully that there will be people at Mass, you know, the priest himself will say, no, get out of here. Everyone here is welcome and no one is to be documented. When you get out of here, that's it.
Did we miss any questions?
Just a, you said website, which website?
St. Pius's website will have the recording of today's session, and I'm not sure what we'll do with Dr. Amy's slides, but we'll give those out to people. Did I miss any questions from anyone? Does anyone have anything you've got? Mary? Did you
I
write it
don't
down?
actually have a question. I just have a concern. This happened to us in OTOC. We are being pushed this year. Our big push this year was to allow work authorized people in the state of Nebraska to have unemployment benefits. We got it through committee. We got someone to make it their priority bill, which is the next step. And then Thursday we found out the bill was done. The bill was done because the federal government said if Nebraska voted and put that bill through, they would fine them $400 million. I just wanted you to know this is occurring in our state.
That's incredibly disheartening.
And it's, we have to keep.
Tom and Margaret, did you have any closing thoughts before we dismiss everyone?
Well, thank you all for being here and for your attention and your great questions. And thank you to our speakers for sharing your insights and experiences with us. Let's give a round of applause. In response to one of the questions, I think Father Chris said something that's near and dear to our hearts. And this was something that's mentioned by Pope Francis. I believe he calls it a culture of encounter. In Omaha, there is a shelter that presently contains about 35 migrants from the southern border, asylum seekers. Every Sunday at 5 p.m., we have a dinner brought in by a parish or a congregation, some Catholic, many non-Catholic, at which the residents and people who have transitioned from the shelter to apartments often come back and share a meal together. All of you are welcome to attend that. If you'd like to meet, talk with, listen to some of the stories as described by Father Mike, Father Chris, we're happy to have you. Come see Margaret or me or Colleen afterwards, and we'll give you the details. Thank you very much.